Deep inside the desert, where rain may vanish for months and a single storm can become a deadly flood, an ancient city learned to save almost every drop. Petra's people carved channels through mountains, built hidden reservoirs beneath the stone, and transformed violent runoff into life, wealth, and power. But how did this remarkable system work, and why did it eventually fall silent before we go deeper? Take a moment to like the video and subscribe. If this is the kind of ancient history and mystery you enjoy, now let us enter the desert city designed to capture the rain. The first sign of Petra is not a city at all. It is a wound in the mountains, a narrow corridor of sandstone where the sky contracts into a thin blue ribbon, and the walls rise high enough to turn daylight into shadow. The passage is called the Sick, and for anyone entering the ancient Nabatean capital, it feels less like a road than a threshold. Hooves strike the stone, sand grinds beneath sandals, the canyon bends so sharply that the world ahead remains hidden until the final opening, where a carved facade suddenly appears in the rose-coloured cliff. Yet the most important feature of this entrance is almost invisible. Along the canyon walls, shallow channels follow the rock. Broken ceramic pipes once ran through some of them. Above and beyond the path lie the remains of dams, retaining walls, and a diversion tunnel cut through the mountain. Petra's first great monument is not the famous facade waiting at the end of the sea. It is the controlled movement of water through a place where water rarely arrives gently. Rain in this landscape does not behave as a dependable seasonal gift. Much of the year, the ground lies dry beneath a hard sun. Springs exist, but they are limited. Then clouds gather over the highlands, sometimes beyond the sight of the city, and rain strikes bare rock faster than the earth can absorb it. Water pours into gullies, gathers force in ravines, and rushes toward the lowest passages carrying mud, stones, and debris. A dry channel can become a violent brown torrent with little warning. The same storm that promises drinking water can tear through streets, damage buildings, and kill anyone trapped inside a narrow canyon. Petra survives because its people learn to treat every drop as both a resource and a threat. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. Because the deeper story of Petra is not simply how a city found water in the desert. It is how an ancient society redesigned an entire landscape so that sudden floods, distant springs, brief showers, and hidden runoff could be captured, divided, slowed, cleaned, stored, and released. The Nabateans did not eliminate the desert. They studied its habits closely enough to make urban life possible within it. Petra is often remembered as a city carved into cliffs, but this description is only partly true. Monumental tombs and temples dominate modern photographs because they survived in stone, while houses, markets, workshops, gardens, pipes, and ordinary infrastructure are less dramatic. In antiquity, Petra was a functioning capital set within a basin surrounded by rugged mountains in what is now southern Jordan. It served merchants, officials, craftspeople, labourers, priests, animals, and caravan travellers moving between Arabia, the Mediterranean, Egypt, and lands farther east. Every person and pack animal increased the demand for water. So did cooking, washing, construction, ritual activity, cultivation, and public life. A small settlement might endure with a spring and a few cisterns. A major trading city required a network. That network spread beyond the structures visible from the main path. Channels were cut along slopes to intercept runoff before it vanished or became destructive. Cisterns were carved into rock and lined to reduce leakage. Reservoirs collected larger volumes. Pipes and aqueducts carried spring water across difficult terrain. Settling basins allowed sediment to fall before water continued toward storage. Dams slowed or redirected torrents, while terraces helped retain soil and moisture. The system was not one machine designed in a single moment. It grew through generations of observation, repair, and rebuilding. Archaeologists can trace many parts of it, but the evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate the precise capacity of Petra's water supply and the population it supported. What survives suggests a city whose prosperity depended on constant attention to details most visitors overlook. A blocked channel could deprive a household or overflow into a road. A cracked lining could drain a cistern into the sandstone. A neglected dam could fail during the storm it was meant to control. Sediment had to be removed, Pipes had to be repaired, water levels had to be watched after poor rains. Petra's beauty rested on maintenance. Behind the carved monuments stood people scraping mud from basins, sealing plaster, clearing debris, and walking the channels after storms. The Sick reveals this hidden reality more clearly than any other part of the city. It is the grand entrance, but also a natural funnel. Water from surrounding catchments once threatened to surge directly through it. To reduce that danger, Nabatean engineers constructed a dam near the entrance and diverted floodwater toward a rock-cut tunnel, steering much of the torrent away from the narrow passage. Channels along the Sick's walls carried cleaner water separately toward the urban centre. This separation of destructive flood flow from controlled delivery is one of Petra's defining achievements. It shows that the Nabateans organised water according to speed, quality, source, and intended use. The desert city appears isolated, yet its location helped make it powerful. Petra stood near routes used to move incense, spices, textiles, metals, and other goods across long distances. Caravans needed secure stopping places, and secure stopping places needed dependable water. Offering it in an arid region was an economic advantage and a form of political strength. Water supported the city, while the city's wealth paid for more elaborate waterworks. Trade and engineering reinforced one another until a sandstone basin became the centre of a kingdom. Popular descriptions sometimes portray Nabatean skill as secret knowledge that appeared suddenly in the desert. The evidence suggests something more human expertise built through long experience, adaptation, and contact with neighbouring societies. No single explanation fully accounts for every feature, and not every channel can be dated with certainty. Their achievement lies in how well they adapted water technology to this difficult landscape. At the end of the Sick, the canyon opens and the carved stone commands attention, yet behind that moment lies another, quieter achievement. The visitor has just walked through a flood control corridor, beside the remains of a water delivery system, beneath cliffs shaped into part of an urban machine. Petra does not begin with its tombs. It begins with the decision to live where rainfall is scarce, violent, and uncertain, and with the realization that the desert could support a city only if its people learned to read water before they attempted to rule stone. Long before Petra becomes a city of reservoirs, monuments, and crowded caravan streets, the Nabateans know the desert in a very different way. They do not begin as urban builders. They begin as people who move. Their early history emerges from the wide, difficult lands stretching across northern Arabia and the southern Levant, where survival depends less on controlling a fixed place than on understanding many places well enough to pass through them safely. Waterholes, seasonal grazing grounds, sheltered valleys, and routes between distant markets form a map carried in memory rather than carved into stone. The people who will eventually transform Petra first learn to survive by refusing to depend too heavily on any single settlement. The Nabateans enter the historical record gradually. Ancient writers describe them as Arab peoples connected with desert trade, though the surviving accounts are incomplete and often written by outsiders who understood them only through war, commerce, or rumour. By the late 4th century BC, they are already wealthy enough to attract unwanted attention. A Macedonian officer sent against them expects to find a vulnerable nomadic community. Instead, he encounters a society that has hidden much of its wealth, moved many of its people and animals away from danger, and used the terrain to frustrate the attack. This episode is often treated as the moment the Nabateans suddenly appear in history. But they did not appear from nowhere. It is simply the point at which settled empires begin to notice them. Their mobility is not evidence of simplicity, it is a strategy. In dry lands, a permanent settlement can become a trap if its fields fail or its wells run low. A mobile community can follow pasture, avoid conflict, and shift between seasonal resources, yet movement also demands precise knowledge. A route that appears empty to an outsider may contain a sequence of dependable stopping places known only to experienced travellers. A shallow depression can hold moisture beneath the surface. A rocky slope may feed runoff into a hidden basin after rain. Certain plants reveal underground water. Certain clouds suggest storms falling beyond the horizon. The Nabateans' later engineering is built upon this older ability to read the desert as a changing system rather than as an empty wasteland. Their world also lies across some of the most valuable trade corridors of the ancient Near East. Aromatic resins such as frankincense and myrrh move northward from southern Arabia. Spices, textiles, precious materials, and luxury goods pass through networks linking the Red Sea, Arabia, Egypt, Syria, and the Mediterranean. These journeys are long, expensive, and dangerous. Caravans need guides who know where water can be found, which valleys offer protection, which tribes control particular stretches of land, and where agreements can be trusted. The Nabateans are well placed to become intermediaries. Their knowledge of routes is not merely geographic, it is political and social. Trade depends on relationships as much as on roads. What survives in the record suggests that Nabatean power grows partly from this ability to connect regions that larger states struggle to control directly. Empires can hold cities and fertile river valleys, but desert routes are harder to govern. A people adapted to mobility can move goods through landscapes where conventional armies operate poorly. By protecting caravans, collecting duties, organizing exchange, and controlling strategic water sources, the Nabateans gradually convert environmental knowledge into economic power. This process is unlikely to have been sudden. Scholars still debate how quickly the Nabateans shifted from predominantly mobile lifeways toward more settled forms of political organization. Archaeology reveals increasing settlement, agriculture, and construction over time, but the evidence remains uneven. Nomadic communities often leave fewer durable traces than urban ones, which means the early centuries of Nabatean history are partly hidden by the very mobility that made their success possible. Stone cities preserve rulers and monuments. Campsites preserve far less. Even after settlements grow, mobility remains part of Nabatean identity. Families, traders, pastoral groups, and seasonal workers likely continue moving between different environments. Petra's rise does not erase older desert knowledge, it concentrates it. The city becomes a place where routes meet, where goods are taxed and exchanged, where water can be stored in quantities large enough to support traders who have crossed hundreds of kilometers. The skills of the traveler become the foundations of the capital. Petra's location begins to make sense in this context. It is not chosen because it resembles an easy agricultural center. It is chosen because it is defensible, connected, and positioned near routes that matter. The surrounding mountains conceal approaches and create natural barriers. Narrow passages allow movement to be watched. Nearby highlands receive more rainfall than the lower desert, though that rain is irregular. Springs and runoff provide the raw material for water systems if they can be properly managed. The basin offers space for settlement, while the cliffs provide stone for construction and surfaces into which storage chambers can be cut. The Nabateans are therefore not desert wanderers who abruptly decide to imitate city-dwelling neighbours. Their urban development grows from their own experience. A caravan society requires secure centres. A trading kingdom requires places where merchants can gather. Agreements can be enforced, and wealth can be displayed. A growing population requires more reliable food and water. The transition toward urban life is not a rejection of the desert. It is an attempt to make the desert support larger and more permanent ambitions. Their expanding wealth also exposes them to new influences. They encounter Greek, Egyptian, Arabian, Mesopotamian, and later Roman forms of art, architecture, administration, and technology. Nabatean culture absorbs elements from many directions without simply copying any one of them. Their monuments may display classical columns, Egyptian forms, and local religious traditions within the same landscape. Their writing uses an Aramaic-derived script that will later contribute to the development of Arabic script. Their gods include regional deities, while their political system develops around kings who rule a territory held together by trade and negotiation. Water management follows the same pattern of adaptation. The Nabateans do not invent every technique they use. Cisterns, channels, dams, and aqueducts exist elsewhere in the ancient world. Their distinction lies in combining these methods with an unusually intimate understanding of arid terrain. A technology useful in a river valley must be altered for a place where water arrives in violent bursts. Storage must be distributed. Runoff must be captured before it disappears. Floodwater must be diverted without wasting all of it. Sediment must be separated from usable supplies. The system has to function across long dry periods and survive sudden storms. By the time Petra begins to emerge as a major centre, the Nabateans have already spent generations learning the central lesson of desert life. Water is never only where it appears to be. It exists in clouds beyond the ridge, in cracks beneath stone, in seasonal channels, in distant springs, and in the memory of those who know when each source can be trusted. The city that rises in the mountains is not the beginning of that knowledge. It is its most ambitious expression. The knowledge carried across generations now meets a harder challenge, choosing where a permanent capital should stand. Petra is not placed beside a great river, broad lake, or fertile plain. It lies within a rugged basin enclosed by sandstone mountains, where access is restricted, cultivable land is limited, and rainfall is both scarce and dangerous. At first glance, it seems like the wrong place for a city expected to serve merchants, animals, officials, craftspeople, and royal households. Yet the very conditions that make Petra difficult also make it valuable. Its location offers protection, concealment, control over movement, and access to several different sources of water provided those sources can be gathered before they vanish. The mountains surrounding Petra are not uniform walls. They are cut by ravines, saddles, narrow gorges, and elevated catchments that collect rain from a much wider area than the urban basin itself. When storms cross the highlands, water runs rapidly over exposed rock and descends toward lower ground. To an unprepared settlement, this creates chaos. To engineers who understand the terrain, each slope becomes part of a potential supply system. The city's real watershed extends far beyond its streets. Rain falling on distant ridges can be guided toward channels, cisterns, terraces, and reservoirs. Petra survives not because abundant water lies directly beneath it, but because its inhabitants learn to make the surrounding mountains deliver water to it. The sandstone also offers unusual possibilities. It is soft enough to cut with iron tools, yet durable enough for large chambers and monumental facades when protected from erosion. Cisterns can be carved directly into cliffs and sealed with waterproof plaster. Channels can be traced along natural contours. Storage chambers can be hidden from enemies and shaded from the sun, slowing evaporation, in a region where open pools lose water quickly. Underground and rock-cut reservoirs offer a critical advantage. The same geology that gives Petra its famous architecture makes its hydraulic network possible. But sandstone presents dangers of its own. It erodes. Water can widen cracks, weaken surfaces, and carry large amounts of sediment into storage basins. A channel cut at the wrong angle may overflow or collapse. A cistern carved into fractured rock may leak. Even well-built systems require repeated inspection and repair. Petra is therefore not created by one moment of brilliant design. It is sustained by a continuing relationship between builders and landscape. Every storm tests that relationship. Defensibility is another reason the location matters. The approach through narrow passages allows movement to be observed and controlled. Large armies cannot enter easily in formation. The mountains provide natural barriers, while the interior basin offers protected space for settlement and trade. Valuable goods can be stored away from open desert routes. Merchants approaching the city pass through terrain where Nabatean authority is difficult to ignore. Petra's isolation is therefore selective. It is concealed enough to be defended, but connected enough to benefit from long-distance commerce. This balance may help explain why the city becomes more than a caravan station. Other stopping places can provide water and shelter, but Petra offers a protected centre where wealth can accumulate. Kings can administer territory from it. Religious monuments can establish legitimacy. Workshops can serve traders. Markets can operate under political supervision. Tombs cut into the cliffs can display the status of powerful families for generations. The landscape does not merely hold the city. It helps organize Nabatean society. Still, the decision to expand here carries enormous risk. Every new building increases demand for drinking water. Every animal entering with a caravan consumes part of the stored supply. Construction requires water for plaster and mortar. Gardens and cultivated terraces need regular attention. Public fountains and baths, which appear in later periods, require an even greater level of confidence. A few failed rainy seasons could expose the limits of the entire system. Scholars still debate how large Petra's population became at its height, partly because estimates depend on assumptions about water capacity, settlement density, and seasonal movement. The evidence remains incomplete, but even conservative estimates imply a city supporting thousands of people in an environment where natural surface water is unreliable. The risks are clearest during flash floods. Rain may fall beyond the city while the streets remain dry. Water then arrives suddenly through narrow channels, gathering speed as it descends. The Essike is especially vulnerable because it acts as a natural conduit toward the basin. Without diversion works, a flood rushing through the gorge could strike people and animals with little warning. Debris carried by the torrent could damage channels and block passage. Buildings near the valley floor would face repeated destruction. The location can support a city only if flood control is treated as seriously as water collection. This creates a strange engineering problem. The Nabateans cannot simply push floodwater away, because every storm contains water they need. Nor can they allow it to flow freely through the city. They must separate useful water from destructive force. Some flows are redirected into safer channels, others are slowed by dams or captured in reservoirs. Cleaner spring water is carried in protected conduits, while runoff containing sediment may pass through settling areas before storage. The system reflects an understanding that water has different qualities depending on its source, speed, and season. Petra's position also links several ecological zones. The highlands around the city can support forms of agriculture that would be impossible in the lower desert. Terraces retain soil on slopes and reduce runoff speed. Small fields, orchards, and grazing areas extend the city's resource base. The region is not lush, but neither is it completely barren. Ancient inhabitants exploit subtle variations in altitude, shade, soil depth, and moisture. A north-facing slope may hold water longer than one exposed to full sun. A narrow valley may collect fertile sediment. A spring too small to supply the whole city may still support a particular neighborhood or garden. What survives in the record suggests that Petra grows by connecting these scattered advantages into one coordinated landscape. No single spring explains its survival. No single reservoir supplies every need. Its strength comes from redundancy. If one source fails, another may continue. If a channel is damaged, stored water can provide temporary relief. If a storm is brief, dozens of small catchments can still collect part of it. This distributed design is less dramatic than a great dam or river aqueduct, but it is well suited to uncertainty. The choice of Petra is therefore not an act of defiance against nature in the simple sense. The Nabateans do not conquer the desert by ignoring its limits. They build within those limits, using protection where the mountains offer it, and intervention where the terrain becomes dangerous. Their city stands because they recognize that an impossible location can become habitable when every slope, crack, ravine, and cloud is treated as part of the same system. The basin is not naturally generous. It becomes productive through attention. To build a city in Petra, it is not enough to know that rain falls. The Nabateans must know where it falls, how quickly it moves, what it carries, where it disappears, and which surfaces can be trusted to release it cleanly. Their engineering begins before any channel is cut. It begins with observation repeated across years, perhaps across centuries, until the behavior of the landscape becomes predictable enough to guide construction. The desert may appear empty and still, but to people who depend on it, every slope has a history and every storm leaves evidence. Rainfall in the Petra region is uneven. One valley may receive a heavy downpour while another remains almost dry. A storm can pass rapidly over the mountains, soaking a distant catchment before moving away. The city itself may see only dark clouds, yet floodwater can arrive later from higher ground. This delay matters. Anyone who understands it has time to clear a channel, move animals, or avoid a narrow gorge. Anyone who does not may be caught by water that seems to come from nowhere. The Nabateans learn to read these patterns through signs that do not survive in stone. The colour and direction of clouds reveal where rain may be falling. Wind carries the smell of wet ground from beyond a ridge. Thunder echoes differently through separate valleys. After a storm, fresh debris shows which ravines carried the strongest flows. Mudlines mark the height reached by earlier floods. Rounded stones reveal channels that move water often enough to reshape them. A patch of reeds or greener vegetation may indicate moisture close to the surface. These details form a practical science created without instruments, written records, or modern forecasts. Such knowledge is essential because not every runoff path deserves the same treatment. A broad rocky slope can provide relatively clean water if animals and settlement waste are kept away from it. A gully crossing loose soil may produce a muddy flow heavy with sediment. Water passing through inhabited areas can carry refuse and contamination. Engineers must decide which streams can be directed toward drinking water storage and which are better suited for irrigation, cleaning, or release beyond the city. The system depends not only on quantity but on quality. The shape of the land provides the first guide. Water follows gravity, but its movement can be altered through small changes. A low wall built across a slope slows runoff and spreads it over a wider area. A shallow channel cut along a contour carries water without allowing it to accelerate dangerously. A basin placed beneath a natural drainage point collects the first surge of a storm. A spillway prevents that basin from overflowing into nearby structures. None of these measures requires enormous architecture. Their effectiveness comes from placing them where the terrain is already trying to send water. This may be one of Petra's most surprising features. The water system is impressive not because every element is large, but because so many small elements work together. A narrow channel high on a hillside may feed a cistern hidden below. Several cisterns may support one neighborhood. Overflow from one reservoir may enter another lower down. Terraces may slow the water before it reaches cultivated soil. A dam may protect a major passage while also directing part of the flow towards storage. The network behaves less like a single aqueduct and more like a web spread across the mountains. The Nabateans also understand that the first water of a storm can be the dirtiest. Dust, animal droppings, leaves, loose sand, and fragments of rock accumulate during dry months. When rain finally arrives, the initial runoff sweeps this material into channels. Allowing that first rush directly into a drinking cistern would quickly foul the supply. Settling basins and diversion arrangements help reduce the problem. Sediment can be trapped before cleaner water continues onward. Though the exact operation of every surviving feature remains uncertain, archaeologists can identify channels, basins, and plastered tanks, but the evidence does not always reveal how water managers use them during a particular storm. Erosion teaches another set of lessons. Fast-moving water cuts deeply into soft surfaces and undermines walls. A channel that is too steep can become destructive. One that is too shallow may clog with sand. Builders must judge the correct gradient, sometimes across long distances where the slope is barely visible. Water must continue moving, but not so quickly that it damages the conduit carrying it. This balance requires careful measurement, whether by sight, simple leveling methods, accumulated experience, or some combination of all three. The remaining channels show that Nabatean builders could maintain remarkably controlled slopes through difficult terrain. Some conduits cling to canyon walls, others cross exposed sections on built supports. Ceramic pipes fit into carved channels, helping protect spring water from contamination and evaporation. Where the ground rises or falls abruptly, the route must be adjusted. Every bend adds friction. Every joint creates a possible leak. Yet water reaches the urban basin from sources beyond the immediate center, proof that the engineers understand both the landscape and the behavior of flowing water. Underground moisture presents a different challenge. It cannot always be seen, but plants, soil color, and damp rock may reveal its presence. Small springs emerging from fractures can be enlarged, protected, and connected to channels. Moisture trapped in sandstone may support shallow wells or seepage collection. Cisterns can also preserve water long after the surface dries, creating artificial underground reserves where none existed naturally. In this sense, Petra's hidden water is partly geological and partly manufactured. The city creates its own subterranean memory of past storms. Knowing where to store water is as important as knowing where to find it. A cistern exposed to sunlight loses more through evaporation than one carved deep into shaded rock. A chamber placed too close to a fracture may leak. A reservoir below unstable ground may fill with collapsed debris. Builders choose locations where stone can be sealed, access can be controlled, and maintenance remains possible. Openings are often kept small compared with the chamber below. Reducing exposure while allowing people to draw water. The system must also account for years when rainfall fails. A brilliant design cannot produce water from an empty sky. Storage, therefore, becomes a defense against time. Water captured during a strong season must remain usable through long, dry months. Supplies may be rationed, certain uses may be restricted, gardens may receive less. Caravans arriving during drought may place additional pressure on the city. No surviving document explains exactly how Nabatean authorities manage scarcity, and scholars still debate the degree of centralized control, yet the scale and coordination of the network suggest that water could not have been left entirely to individual households. Someone had to protect catchments from pollution, someone had to clear channels before the rainy season, someone had to decide when reservoirs should be cleaned and repaired. The knowledge of water was therefore not held only by engineers, it belonged to workers, herders, farmers, householders, and officials whose routines kept the system functioning. Children growing up in Petra would have learned where not to stand when storms gathered. Travellers would have been guided towards safe water points. Maintenance crews would have known which channels clogged first and which cisterns leaked after earthquakes. Petra's waterworks emerge from this culture of attention. Stone preserves the channels, but not the thousands of decisions behind them. The true instrument of the city is human memory, the remembered flood, the failed wall, the spring that weakened, the reservoir that lasted through drought, the slope that delivered more water than expected. Each lesson is added to the system until the desert becomes readable. Only then can the Nabateans begin to carve the network that will carry water through the heart of their city. Once the Nabateans understand how water moves across the mountains, they begin to turn that knowledge into lines cut through stone. These channels are among Petra's least dramatic remains, often no wider than a hand and easy to overlook beside towering facades. Yet they form the city's hidden circulatory system. They cling to cliff walls, pass above narrow paths, disappear beneath later debris, and reappear where the rock changes shape. Some carry spring water from distant sources. Others gather rainfall from exposed slopes. Together they allow the city to receive water from places that seem disconnected from the urban basin. Carving a channel through sandstone requires more than following the shortest route. Water must descend continuously, but only slightly. If the slope is too steep, the flow gains speed, damages the channel, and carries sediment into storage areas. If it is too gentle, the water slows, deposits silt, and may stop altogether. Across irregular cliffs, the builders must maintain a controlled gradient while working around cracks, projections, and sudden drops. The task is closer to drawing a nearly level line across a mountain than simply cutting a ditch downhill. The surviving conduits suggest careful surveying. Nabatean builders likely use simple tools involving cords, straight edges, plumb lines, and water levels, but practical experience would have been just as important. A worker who has spent years repairing channels understands how small errors reveal themselves. Water pools where the floor rises slightly, sand accumulates behind a rough joint, a sharp bend creates turbulence, a weak wall leaks under pressure. These lessons become part of the craft, passed from experienced builders to younger crews. Many channels are cut directly into the rock, with a narrow bed and raised outer edge. In exposed places, they may be covered with flat stone slabs to protect the water from dust, animals, falling debris, and sunlight. Covers also reduce evaporation, a constant concern in a dry climate, where the natural wall offers no suitable ledge. Builders construct sections from masonry and plaster. The result is a hybrid system in which the mountain itself serves as the main structure, while human additions bridge the places where geology refuses to cooperate. Some conduits once held ceramic pipes fitted section by section. Pipes offer several advantages over open channels. They protect cleaner spring water from contamination and make it easier to carry water through inhabited zones. They also allow the flow to pass around bends or beneath pathways. But they introduce new weaknesses. Every joint can leak. Mineral deposits can narrow the interior. Earthquakes can crack individual sections or shift them out of alignment. Repairs require access, replacement pieces, and skilled labour. Petra's water system therefore depends on continuous maintenance rather than permanent perfection. The channels along the Sick show how closely water engineering and urban design are connected. On both sides of the gorge, conduits run above the ancient roadway, carrying water toward the centre. One system appears to have transported spring water, while another may have collected or distributed different supplies. Their exact use may have changed over time, and scholars still debate the chronology of particular sections. What survives in the record suggests repeated rebuilding. with older channels altered as the city grew and new demands emerged. These conduits do not simply end at the urban entrance. They divide. Smaller branches likely feed cisterns, fountains, houses, temples, and public facilities. Control points may have regulated how much water entered different parts of the city. Stone basins and settling tanks interrupt the flow, allowing sediment to drop before water continues. Overflow channels carry excess water away from full reservoirs. In some locations, one storage area is positioned above another, so that water can descend through a sequence of uses rather than being wasted after a single delivery. This layered distribution is important because Petra contains neighborhoods at different elevations. A source high in the mountains can serve several lower areas by gravity, but once water descends, lifting it again is difficult. Engineers must plan the order of delivery carefully. Higher facilities receive water first, while lower districts depend on what continues downstream or on separate catchments. The city's topography becomes part of its social geography. Access to a particular channel may influence where houses, baths, gardens, or workshops can be built. Not all water needs the same protection. Drinking water requires cleaner collection and covered transport. Water for construction, animals, washing, or irrigation can tolerate more sediment. The network may therefore have operated with supplies of different quality rather than one uniform citywide flow. A carefully protected spring conduit could serve drinking points, while storm runoff filled larger reservoirs for less sensitive uses. No surviving administrative text explains these distinctions in detail, but the physical system strongly suggests deliberate separation. The channels also reveal how the Nabateans respond to obstacles. When a cliff blocks the preferred route, they can cut a recess into its face. When a ravine interrupts the slope, they can build a short bridge or wall-supported conduit. When the path narrows, they raise the channel above head height. When unstable rock threatens collapse, they redirect the line around it. Each solution is local, yet all must preserve the larger gradient. The system succeeds because its builders treat the terrain not as a blank surface, but as a sequence of specific problems. A lesser-known feature of arid region waterworks is the danger of roots. Wherever stored moisture persists, plants seek it. Roots can enter cracks, loosen plaster, and block narrow conduits. Insects and small animals may also reach open channels. Leaves and windblown sand collect during dry months, especially in shaded bends. Before the rainy season, workers must inspect the network and clear these obstructions. A channel left untouched for a single year may still function. One neglected for several years can become useless. This work rarely leaves visible evidence. The people who carve and clean the channels do not sign their names. Their labour survives only in tool marks, repaired plaster, replaced pipe sections, and altered routes. Yet the system could not operate without them. Monumental facades may be completed once and admired for centuries. A water channel must prove itself every day. It must survive heat, storms, sediment, animals, earthquakes, and human carelessness. Its success is measured not by beauty but by whether water arrives where it's expected. The effort becomes even more impressive when considered across the full landscape. A single channel may seem modest, but dozens of connected lines transform the mountains into a collecting surface. Rain that would once have vanished into gravel is intercepted. Spring water that would have seeped into a ravine is enclosed and guided. Overflow that might erode a street is redirected towards storage. The Nabateans do not create new water, they reduce the amount that escapes them. That distinction lies at the centre of Petra's achievement. In a wetter city, small losses may go unnoticed. Here, every leak matters. Every broken joint represents drinking water disappearing into the rock. Every overflowing cistern is a missed reserve for the dry season. The channels therefore embody a culture shaped by scarcity, one in which precision is not an aesthetic preference but a condition of survival. As water enters Petra along these carved lines, it appears calm and controlled, far removed from the storms that produced it. But elsewhere in the mountains, the same rainfall is gathering into violent torrents. The channels can guide useful flows, yet they cannot stop the largest floods on their own. To protect the city, the Nabateans must build structures strong enough to confront water at its most destructive. The channels carry water when it can be persuaded to move gently, but Petra's engineers must also confront the moments when the desert refuses to be gentle at all. A A storm breaking over the surrounding highlands can send thousands of tons of water, stone, mud, and uprooted vegetation toward the city in a matter of minutes. The danger is not the steady rise of a river, it is the sudden transformation of dry ground into a moving wall. Narrow ravines accelerate the flow, while the smooth sandstone offers little resistance. By the time floodwater reaches the entrances and lower valleys of Petra, it may already possess enough force to destroy walls, bury roads, and sweep away people and animals. The Sick is especially dangerous. Its towering walls create a dramatic approach to the city, but they also form a natural funnel leading toward Petra's centre. Without intervention, runoff from a broad mountain catchment would pour directly through this passage. Anyone trapped inside would have few places to escape. The gorge narrows repeatedly, concentrating the water and increasing its speed. The same geography that protects Petra from armies exposes it to floods. The Nabatean response is not to seal the gorge or attempt to stop all water with one immense barrier. Such a structure would be vulnerable to collapse and would waste a valuable resource. Instead, they reshape the flood's route. Near the entrance to the Sick, they build a dam across the natural channel and cut a diversion tunnel through the rock. Much of the storm flow is guided away from the main passage and into another ravine, bypassing the vulnerable entrance before continuing downstream. The tunnel remains one of the clearest examples of Nabatean landscape engineering because it changes not merely a channel, but the behaviour of an entire watershed. During ordinary conditions, the structure may appear almost unnecessary. The ground is dry, the tunnel empty, and the dam little more than stonework against the canyon. Its purpose becomes visible only during rare and violent moments. Then the system must respond immediately, without gates being raised or crews arriving in time. Gravity directs the water automatically. The dam intercepts the flood, while the tunnel offers a lower and safer route. Good flood control in Petra depends on structures that remain passive for most of the year, but become decisive within minutes. The dam itself must endure repeated impacts. Floodwater carries more than liquid. Stones strike its face. Mud fills spaces between blocks. Branches and debris collect against openings. Water presses into weak joints and searches for roots around the structure. If the foundations are poorly anchored, the entire barrier can be undermined. If the spillway is too narrow, water overtops the wall and erodes its rear face. Nabatean builders therefore use the surrounding bedrock wherever possible. Tying masonry into the natural canyon and directing overflow towards surfaces less likely to collapse. Not every dam around Petra serves the same purpose. Some protect roads or inhabited areas, others slow runoff so that sediment settles before water reaches a reservoir. Smaller barriers spread water across agricultural terraces, allowing it to soak into soil rather than rush away. Check dams placed across gullies reduce erosion and trap fertile silt. A structure only a metre high can influence a surprisingly large area if it interrupts the flow at the correct point. This distributed approach matters because no single defence can protect the whole city. Water enters the Petra basin from many directions. A storm may overwhelm one ravine while leaving another almost dry. Dams and diversion walls are therefore positioned across the landscape, each responding to a particular catchment. The network resembles a series of negotiations with the terrain. In one valley, water is turned aside. In another, it is slowed elsewhere. Part of the flow is captured while the rest is released safely. The release of excess water is essential. Storage systems have limits, and reservoirs already filled from earlier storms cannot accept an unlimited new surge. If engineers attempt to capture everything, the result may be catastrophic overflow. Spillways allow surplus water to continue downstream without damaging the main structure. Their surfaces must be strong enough to resist erosion, and their direction must keep the released torrent away from buildings, roads, and lower cisterns. The most successful design is not the one that stores the greatest possible volume during a single storm, but the one that preserves the wider system. Floodwater also brings sediment, and sediment quietly destroys hydraulic infrastructure. A reservoir filled with mud stores far less water. A channel clogged with gravel may send the next flow over its edge. Dams can help by reducing speed and allowing heavier material to settle in places where it can later be removed. Yet this creates a demanding maintenance cycle. After a major storm, workers must inspect barriers, clear debris, reopen conduits, and remove accumulated silt. If the city neglects this work, each flood leaves the system weaker for the next one. No surviving Nabatean manual explains how these crews were organised. Scholars still debate the extent to which flood management was directed by royal officials, local communities, property owners, or specialised workers. The scale of the major diversion work suggests coordinated authority, but smaller dams may have been maintained by families or agricultural groups. What survives in the record suggests layers of responsibility. From monumental public defences to modest structures serving individual terraces. Flood management also shapes the rhythms of life in Petra. The approach of rain is not treated casually. People living near low ground must watch the sky. Merchants may delay movement through narrow passages. Animals must be brought away from channels that appear safe during dry weather. Workers may clear grates and openings before storms arrive. Afterward, the city inspects the damage and measures what has been gained. A flood can destroy one structure while filling several reservoirs. Its consequences are never entirely good or entirely bad. The system is effective, but it is not infallible. Extreme storms can exceed the capacity of channels and diversion tunnels. Earthquakes can crack dams or shift masonry. Debris can block an opening at the worst possible moment. Later repairs visible in some structures reveal that failure and rebuilding are part of Petra's history. No single explanation fully accounts for every alteration. Because different phases of construction overlap and later inhabitants continue using and modifying Nabatean works, the city's hydraulic defences are not frozen achievements, they are repeatedly tested. One surprising consequence of the dams is that they do more than protect human structures. By slowing water, they encourage sediment to accumulate and moisture to remain in the ground. Areas below small barriers can support vegetation longer than exposed slopes. Agricultural plots become more stable. Soil that would have washed into distant valleys is held close to the city. Flood control therefore becomes part of food production, connecting sudden storms with crops harvested months later. This relationship reveals the deeper logic of Petra's design. Water is never managed for only one purpose. A diversion tunnel protects a road. A dam reduces erosion. A settling area improves water quality. A spillway preserves a reservoir. A terrace stores moisture in soil. Each intervention creates several effects across the landscape. The Nabateans succeed because they think in systems, even if their knowledge is expressed through practical experience rather than formal theory. When the rain stops, the roar fades quickly, mud settles, the channels empty. The mountains return to silence, leaving little evidence of the violence that has passed through them. Yet behind the dams and within the protected basin, water remains. It has been stripped of speed, separated from debris, and guided toward places where it can be kept. The next challenge is no longer how to survive the flood. It is how to preserve its brief abundance through the long months when the sky offers nothing. Once the violence of the storm has been slowed and redirected, Petra's survival depends on what happens next. Water cannot be left in open channels or shallow pools where the desert sun will pull it back into the air. It must be taken out of sight. Across the city and surrounding mountains, the Nabateans carve chambers into sandstone, seal their interiors, narrow their openings, and turn solid rock into reservoirs. These cisterns become the hidden memory of the rainy season, preserving water long after the clouds have disappeared and the valleys have returned to dust. Many of Petra's cisterns are easy to miss. Their entrances may appear as dark holes beside a path, small square openings cut into a cliff, or shallow doorways leading into shadow. The modest entrance conceals a much larger chamber within. This design is deliberate. A narrow opening reduces evaporation, limits contamination, and makes access easier to control. The storage space can expand behind the rock face without exposing a wide surface to the sun from outside. A cistern may seem insignificant. Inside, it can hold enough water to sustain a household, a neighborhood, a group of animals, or travelers moving through the region. The chambers vary greatly in size and shape. Some are roughly cut, following natural weaknesses in the sandstone. Others are carefully squared, with smooth walls and level floors. Larger reservoirs may contain supporting pillars left in place when the surrounding rock is removed. These pillars prevent the ceiling from collapsing under the weight of the mountain above. In some chambers, steps descend toward the bottom, so water remains reachable as the level falls. Small ledges may have supported containers, lamps, or maintenance tools. Every feature reflects an attempt to make stored water usable through changing conditions. Carving the chamber is only the first task. Sandstone absorbs water through pores and fractures, and an unsealed reservoir may slowly drain itself into the surrounding rock. Nabatean builders coat cistern walls with layers of hydraulic plaster, creating a smoother and less permeable surface. The plaster must remain flexible enough to survive minor movement, yet strong enough to resist constant contact with water. Cracks are repaired repeatedly. Old coatings are covered by new ones. The surviving layers sometimes reveal long periods of use, with one generation sealing the work of another. Water entering a cistern rarely arrives perfectly clean. Even after passing through channels and settling basins, it may carry dust, sand, insects, plant material, and fine sediment. The floor is sometimes shaped so this material collects in a lower area away from the point where water is drawn. In other cases, a smaller basin receives the incoming flow before water spills into the main chamber. These arrangements reduce contamination, but they do not eliminate it. Cisterns must be emptied or entered periodically so accumulated mud can be removed. Cleaning such a chamber is unpleasant and dangerous work. The interior is dark, damp, and poorly ventilated. Sediment may be thick enough to trap a foot. Slippery plaster makes movement difficult. Lamps consume oxygen and produce smoke. Workers must lower buckets, scrape the floor, inspect the walls, and repair cracks before the next rainy season. A cistern neglected for too long gradually loses capacity until a chamber that once stored water becomes little more than a pit filled with hardened silt. The labour is especially important because stored water changes over time. Without movement, it can become stale. Organic matter encourages unpleasant smells and microbial growth, though ancient people would have described the problem through taste, appearance, and experience rather than modern biology. Households may have allowed water to settle before use or drawn it through cloth. Some supplies may have been reserved for drinking, while others served animals, washing, plaster production. Or irrigation. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate how strictly different water qualities were separated within Petra. Yet the variety of storage structures suggests that not every cistern had the same purpose. Ownership may also have varied. Small cisterns near houses or agricultural plots were likely connected to particular families or properties. Larger reservoirs required coordinated construction and may have served broader communities, public buildings, or royal institutions. Control over these supplies would have carried social power. In a dry year, access to a full cistern could matter more than access to almost any other form of wealth. Water could support guests, workers, animals, and crops. It could allow a household to remain in place while others were forced to move. Petra's storage network also extends beyond the dense urban centre. Cisterns appear along travel routes in agricultural areas, near shrines, and on elevated ground surrounding the basin. These scattered reserves make movement through the landscape safer. A caravan does not need to carry all its water from one distant source if dependable storage points exist along the way. Herders can use seasonal grazing areas farther from permanent springs. Farmers can maintain terraces where rainfall alone would be too uncertain. The cistern network enlarges the practical territory of the city. One lesser-known advantage of underground storage is temperature. Water kept inside shaded rock remains cooler than water held in open basins. The chamber protects it from direct sunlight and reduces daily temperature changes. Cooler water is more pleasant to drink and may deteriorate more slowly. The cistern therefore does more than preserve quantity. It improves the conditions in which the supply is kept. But storage creates its own vulnerabilities. A cracked ceiling can drop debris into the water. An earthquake can split the plaster lining or open a fracture through which an entire reserve slowly escapes. A damaged inlet may allow floodwater carrying heavy sediment to rush directly into the chamber. Animals can fall through unprotected openings. Hostile forces may attempt to seize or contaminate supplies. Cistern entrances must therefore be covered, guarded, or concealed, especially where they serve strategic routes. Their distribution gives Petra resilience. The city does not depend on one enormous reservoir whose failure would be catastrophic. Water is divided among many chambers. If one cistern leaks, others may remain usable. If one neighbourhood is cut off, local storage can sustain it temporarily. If a storm fills only part of the watershed, Cisterns in that area can still capture the flow. This decentralization reduces risk, though it also makes management more complicated. The system must balance storage against demand. A large chamber is useful only if enough runoff reaches it. A cistern positioned beneath a small catchment may remain partly empty even after rain. One placed beneath a powerful gully may fill quickly but suffer from sediment and structural damage. Builders have to match each reservoir to the water available above it. The landscape determines capacity as much as the chamber's dimensions do. During long dry months, the city lives from these stored fragments of earlier storms. The water level drops slowly. Steps once submerged emerge from the darkness. Marks on plaster reveal how much remains. People lower containers farther into the chamber. Animals gather near distribution points. Gardens receive less. Every withdrawal shortens the time until the next rain must come. Yet the cisterns make waiting possible. They stretch a few hours of rainfall across seasons. They convert a sudden flood into thousands of quiet daily uses, a cup filled in a household, mortar mixed at a building site, an animal watered after a long journey, a tree kept alive through summer. Beneath Petra, the desert's brief abundance is stored in darkness, and the city above continues because the stone remembers the rain. The water stored beneath Petra is not yet a secure supply simply because it has been captured. A reservoir can be full and still be nearly useless if its contents are thick with mud, exposed to contamination, or distributed so poorly that one district receives more than it can use while another runs dry. The Nabateans therefore face a second problem after collection turning uncertain: imperfect water into something dependable enough to support a city. Their solution lies not in one spectacular invention, but in a chain of smaller decisions that improve the supply at every stage. As rainwater descends from the mountains, it carries the landscape with it. Fine sand, fragments of sandstone, leaves, dust, animal waste, and loose soil are swept into the flow. The first runoff after a long dry season is often the dirtiest because months of accumulated debris are suddenly washed from exposed surfaces. If this mixture enters a cistern directly, the chamber may fill with sediment long before it fills with usable water. Petra's engineers respond by slowing the flow before storage. Settling basins are among the simplest and most effective parts of the system. Water enters a widened chamber or shallow tank where its speed decreases. Heavier particles sink to the bottom, while clearer water continues through an outlet positioned above the sediment layer. Some installations appear to use more than one stage, allowing progressively finer material to settle before the supply reaches its final reservoir. The principle is straightforward, but its success depends on careful placement. A basin that is too small fills rapidly with mud. One positioned after rather than before a narrow pipe allows debris to block the conduit first. These basins also require cleaning. Sediment does not disappear simply because it has been separated from the water. Workers must remove it, sometimes after every major storm. The mud may be carried away in baskets or used where appropriate to enrich nearby soil. What survives in the record suggests an urban system built around repeated maintenance rather than occasional emergency repair. Petra's infrastructure functions because people expect channels to clog, plaster to crack, and reservoirs to accumulate silt. Failure is not treated as an unusual event. It is built into the rhythm of management. The water may also pass through screens or narrow openings that trap larger debris. Stone grates, covered channels, and protected inlets reduce the chance that branches, leaves, or animals enter storage chambers. Sand itself can act as a crude filter when water seeps slowly through layered material, although the exact use of filtration techniques at Petra remains uncertain. Scholars still debate the operation of some basins and channels because later alterations have obscured their original design. No single explanation fully accounts for every structure, but the wider pattern is clear: water is repeatedly slowed, separated, and protected before use. Distribution presents a different challenge. Petra is not a flat city. Its neighbourhoods, monuments, gardens, and public spaces occupy terraces and slopes at different heights. Gravity can move water downward with little effort, but it cannot return water to a higher level once it has descended. This means the sequence of delivery matters. A poorly planned branch can drain too much water into one reservoir and leave another empty. A channel opened too widely can reduce pressure farther along the line. The city's supply must therefore be divided with precision. Small gates, openings, basins, and junctions likely helped regulate flow. Some could be blocked with stone, wood, plaster, or temporary barriers. Others may have been designed to release a fixed amount of water before overflow continued elsewhere. A household cistern could fill first, after which surplus passed toward a lower garden. A public reservoir might receive priority during a storm, while excess water entered agricultural channels. The exact rules are lost. But controlled distribution is visible in the way conduits divide and reconnect across the site. This raises questions about authority. Water in Petra could not have been managed entirely through chance. Someone had to decide which channels served public buildings, which reservoirs were reserved for particular uses, and how repairs were organized. Large-scale works, especially those protecting the sick or carrying spring water over long distances, suggest coordination beyond individual families, royal officials, local administrators, religious institutions, property owners. And specialized workers may all have shared responsibility. The evidence remains incomplete, and no surviving Nabatean archive explains the system in detail. In normal years, the network may have created an impression of abundance. Fountains could flow, gardens could be watered, baths could operate. Visitors arriving from harsher desert routes might see Petra not as a place barely surviving, but as a city displaying mastery over scarcity. Yet this abundance was carefully constructed. Every visible stream depended on invisible reserves, repaired channels, cleaned basins, and decisions about who received water first. Dry years exposed the limits more clearly. When rainfall weakened, the city could not replace what it consumed. Reservoir levels fell, smaller springs produced less, agricultural terraces dried more quickly, supplies intended for washing, construction, or ornamental use may have been reduced so drinking water could be preserved. Animals arriving with caravans increased pressure at exactly the moment trade remained economically important. Petra's rulers faced a difficult balance. Conserve water too strictly, and the city's commercial life suffers. Distribute it too freely and the reserves may fail before the next rain. The Nabateans likely relied on redundancy rather than certainty. They drew from springs, storm runoff, small cisterns, large reservoirs, and water stored beyond the urban centre. Different sources could compensate for one another. A weak rainy season might still leave spring-fed conduits operating. A damaged aqueduct might be replaced temporarily by neighbourhood storage. A storm falling on one side of the mountains could fill cisterns even when another catchment remained dry. This flexibility is what turns scarcity into apparent abundance. Petra does not possess an endless supply. It possesses many limited supplies connected well enough to behave like a larger one. The distinction is important. The city's success rests not on defeating environmental limits, but on spreading risk across the landscape. Maintenance remains the quiet force holding everything together. Before storms, channels must be cleared. After storms, damage must be assessed. During drought, leakage becomes especially dangerous. A small crack that seems unimportant in a wet year may waste the last reserve in a dry one. Water managers must know which cisterns are full, which are contaminated, and which are reserved for emergencies. Households must understand how much they can draw without endangering the months ahead. Through this constant attention, Petra achieves something that can look almost impossible from a distance. It creates fountains in a desert, supports gardens among barren cliffs, and supplies crowds in a basin without a permanent river. But the abundance is never natural. It is measured, filtered, rationed, repaired, and remembered. Every drop that appears in the city has survived a long journey through storm, stone, sediment, storage, and human judgment. Once Petra can store and distribute water with confidence, the city begins to use it for more than survival. A reliable supply allows population to grow, merchants to remain longer, workshops to expand, and rulers to imagine buildings that would have been impossible in a settlement living from one uncertain spring. Water becomes an economic resource, but also a political language. It can be displayed, controlled, and transformed into evidence that the Nabatean kingdom possesses the wealth and authority to make abundance appear where nature offers very little. Caravan trade supplies much of the prosperity behind this transformation. Merchants arriving at Petra bring incense, spices, textiles, metals, oils, and other valuable goods through routes linking Arabia with the Mediterranean world. They also bring large numbers of camels, horses, donkeys, guards, handlers, and servants. A caravan may survive a desert crossing by rationing water carefully, but once it reaches a major commercial centre, animals must drink, people must wash. Goods must be prepared for sale, and supplies must be replenished. Petra's hydraulic network makes these activities possible on a scale that smaller desert stations cannot easily match. This gives the city a powerful advantage. Water allows Petra to function as more than a place of passage. It becomes a place of delay, exchange, taxation, negotiation, and storage. Merchants can wait for favourable conditions, divide cargoes, arrange protection, and sell goods to different buyers. Craftspeople can repair equipment and produce containers, textiles, metal objects, and architectural decoration. Officials can monitor trade and collect revenue. The longer goods and people remain, the more wealth circulates through the city. Some of that wealth returns to the water system. Channels are extended, cisterns enlarged, dams repaired, and new distribution lines constructed as the city expands. The relationship becomes self-reinforcing. Water supports trade, trade produces revenue, and revenue pays for more elaborate infrastructure. Petra's growth is therefore not simply the result of lying beside a profitable route. It reflects the ability to convert movement through the desert into permanent urban power. The city's monumental architecture makes that power visible. Great facades are cut into cliffs, temples rise above terraces, processional routes guide visitors through carefully arranged spaces. Tombs belonging to wealthy families dominate the landscape long after the houses of ordinary residents disappear. These monuments are usually discussed as artistic or religious achievements, but each one also depends on water. Stonecutters need it. Plasterers and builders use it in mortar and finishing work. Labourers drink it. Animals haul materials with it. The construction of a monumental city would place enormous pressure on Petra's reserves. Water itself also becomes part of the architecture. Fountains, pools, basins, and water gardens appear in areas associated with elite residences and public spaces. In a dry environment, flowing water has an emotional effect that is difficult to separate from politics. Its sound suggests security. Its coolness changes the atmosphere of a courtyard. Its reflection doubles columns and carved stone. A visitor who has crossed a harsh landscape may interpret a pool not as decoration, but as a declaration that the city has reserves to spare. One of Petra's most remarkable complexes includes a large garden and pool near the city centre, often associated with the area known as the Great Temple. Archaeological evidence suggests that this was not a simple utilitarian reservoir, but an ornamental landscape containing water, vegetation, and architectural features. The precise interpretation remains debated, yet the existence of such a space reveals extraordinary confidence. Maintaining plants and an exposed pool in Petra requires constant supply and careful management. Water that could have been stored underground is instead made visible. This display does not mean the Nabateans forget scarcity. On the contrary, only a society deeply aware of water's value could understand the power of showing it. A fountain in a river city may seem ordinary. A fountain in Petra carries a different message. It announces that rulers can command distant springs, organize labour, protect conduits, and release water in a controlled form. The display turns engineering into legitimacy. Religious life may have strengthened this connection. Across the ancient Near East, springs, rain, fertility, and purification carry sacred meaning. Nabatean sanctuaries include basins, channels, and spaces where water may have supported ritual washing, offerings, or symbolic renewal. The surviving evidence does not always reveal exactly how these installations were used, and scholars still debate the relationship between particular water features and religious practice. What survives suggests that water in Petra moved through both practical and ceremonial worlds. Control over supply could also reinforce social divisions. Elite houses and public monuments may have received water through protected conduits, while poorer households depended more heavily on local cisterns or shared collection points. Gardens and baths required quantities beyond basic domestic needs. Access to such facilities revealed status. Even if the city maintained public reservoirs, not every resident experienced its water system in the same way. The Nabatean kings stand at the centre of this growing urban order. Their authority depends on trade networks, alliances, taxation, military protection, and control over territory. Yet infrastructure gives their rule a physical presence. A dam survives because labour is organised. An aqueduct functions because routes are secured and repairs funded. A public fountain flows because water has been diverted through a chain of decisions extending far beyond the visible basin. Royal power becomes embedded in stone channels and plastered reservoirs. This does not necessarily mean every waterwork is centrally designed. Families, neighbourhoods, temples, and landowners likely build and maintain parts of the network themselves. Petra's hydraulic system is too varied and extensive to be explained by one authority alone. No single explanation fully accounts for how rights were assigned or disputes resolved, but major urban projects require coordination. And the city's expansion suggests that private and public systems were linked within a wider framework. Water also changes the rhythms of commerce. Markets can operate more regularly when traders know that supplies exist. Inns and food preparation areas can serve larger crowds. Animals can recover before continuing their journeys. Perishable goods can be washed or processed. Construction seasons can be extended beyond brief periods after rainfall. The city becomes less dependent on the immediate weather because it has stored earlier seasons beneath the ground. Yet this prosperity contains a hidden vulnerability. The more successful Petra becomes, the more water it needs. Monumental building, public baths, decorative pools, gardens, workshops, and growing neighbourhoods increase consumption. Displays of abundance can continue only while the underlying system remains healthy. A damaged spring conduit or series of poor rainy seasons may force difficult choices. Water used to symbolize power can quickly reveal the limits of that power. For a time, however, the balance holds. Visitors enter through the controlled passage of the sick and emerge into a city where carved stone rises above streets supplied by hidden channels. Merchants find water for their animals. Priests approach sanctuaries with basins nearby. Wealthy families create shaded courtyards and planted spaces. Rulers shape the desert into an image of order. Petra's monuments often appear to be the product of extraordinary artistic ambition, but their deeper foundation lies beneath and behind them. Every facade, temple, market, and garden rests on the same quiet achievement: the city has learned to move water well enough that survival can be transformed into spectacle. Scarcity has not disappeared. It has been concealed inside a system so effective that the kingdom can afford to make water visible. Behind Petra's channels, reservoir, fountains, and carved monuments stands a population whose work is far less visible than the engineering itself. The city does not survive because stone has been shaped once and left to perform indefinitely. It survives because people return to the same systems again and again, clearing, sealing, measuring, carrying, rationing, and rebuilding. Every impressive hydraulic structure depends on ordinary labour performed in heat, dust, darkness, and mud. The engineers may determine where water should go, but the city's endurance rests on those who keep it moving. Some workers carve the channels that cross Petra's cliffs. Their tools strike sandstone in repeated rhythms, removing only enough material to preserve the required slope. They must work carefully because an error of a few centimetres can alter the flow across a long distance. The task is slow and physically demanding. Stone dust settles on skin and clothing. Sunlight reflects from pale rock. On exposed ledges, workers balance above steep drops while extending conduits toward the city. Their names do not survive, but the precision of their labour remains visible in lines that hold a steady course across irregular mountains. Other crews shape cisterns underground. These workers enter narrow openings and enlarge chambers from within, cutting into shadow as debris is passed back toward the surface. They leave supporting pillars where the ceiling requires strength. They smooth the walls so plaster can adhere. They cut steps down to the lowest point, anticipating the day when the reservoir will be nearly empty and every remaining measure of water must still be reached. This is not glamorous construction. It is dangerous, closed, and difficult to supervise, yet the city cannot grow without it. Plasterers follow the stonecutters. They prepare mixtures capable of sealing porous rock and surviving long exposure to water. The exact recipes may vary with period and location, but the work requires knowledge of materials, drying conditions, and surface preparation. A lining applied too thinly may crack. One placed over dust or unstable stone may separate from the wall. Repairs must blend with older layers while remaining watertight. A skilled plasterer protects thousands of future withdrawals with work that may never be seen once the chamber fills. Then come the cleaners. After storms, they inspect channels for sand, branches, and collapsed stone. They remove sediment from settling basins before the next downpour carries it farther into the system. They descend into cisterns when water levels permit and shovel out the mud accumulated on the floor. This labour repeats because the desert continuously tries to reclaim the network. Wind fills open channels with dust, roots enter cracks, animals disturb coverings. Floods move debris into carefully cleared spaces. Petra's infrastructure survives only through resistance to this slow accumulation. Water carriers form another essential group. Even in a city with channels and local reservoirs, water does not always arrive directly where it is needed. Households draw it from cisterns. Builders require it at construction sites. Animals must be supplied in courtyards or caravan areas. Containers made from pottery, leather, or other materials move water through the streets in quantities small enough to handle, but heavy enough to shape daily routines. Carrying water is repetitive work. And the distance between storage and use affects how much a household can consume. Women, servants, labourers, and enslaved people may all have performed parts of this task, though the surviving evidence rarely identifies them clearly. The archaeological record preserves reservoirs more easily than the social arrangements around them. Scholars still debate how work was divided within Nabatean households and institutions. What survives in the record suggests that access to labour was closely tied to access to water. A wealthy household could send others to collect and manage supplies, while poorer residents spent more of their own time doing so. Merchants also depend on the system in practical ways. A caravan arriving at Petra does not simply unload goods. Animals must be led to watering points without overwhelming local supplies. Cargo must be protected from sudden storms. Travellers need places to wash, rest, and refill containers. Someone organises these movements. Stable workers, handlers, guides, and market officials help prevent disorder around the most valuable resource in the city during crowded trading periods. Water management becomes crowd management. Farmers working the terraces around Petra understand a different side of the network. They watch the soil rather than the cistern. A small diversion wall can determine whether a field receives moisture or remains dry. Too much runoff may erode a terrace, while too little leaves crops vulnerable. Farmers repair retaining walls, clear channels, and redistribute sediment after storms. They know which trees can survive on limited watering and which plots hold moisture longest. Their work connects the city's hydraulic system to food production, making water management a seasonal conversation between stone and soil. Gardeners serving elite compounds face still another challenge. Ornamental plants, shaded courtyards, and pools require careful attention in a climate where decorative water use can quickly become wasteful. They must judge how much can be released without damaging the larger supply. They prune plants to reduce stress, manage soil around roots, and perhaps reuse water where possible. The visible beauty of Petra's gardens depends on invisible restraint. Officials and water managers likely coordinate the larger network, though their titles and precise duties remain uncertain. They may record reservoir levels, organise labour, supervise repairs, or settle disputes between users. Someone must decide which structure receives attention first after an earthquake. Someone must authorise the diversion of labour toward a damaged dam rather than a public building. Someone must know whether a dry cistern reflects leakage, overuse, or failed rainfall. The system requires information as much as tools. Disputes are inevitable. A channel serving several properties can become a source of conflict if one user blocks too much flow. A damaged conduit may deprive a lower district while upper users continue drawing water. Garden owners may be accused of taking more than their share during drought. A caravan may demand supplies when local reserves are already low. No surviving Nabatean legal code explains how these conflicts were settled. And no single explanation fully accounts for the balance between royal authority and local custom. Yet the city's long operation suggests that rules, agreements, and enforcement existed. Children growing up in Petra would learn these rules early. They would know which cistern openings were dangerous, which channels carried cleaner water, and which valleys should be avoided when clouds gathered over the highlands. They would see adults repair plaster, cover inlets, and measure remaining reserves. Water knowledge would enter ordinary life through habit rather than formal instruction. The city's engineering culture was not confined to specialists. It was shared through repeated experience. This is the human machinery beneath Petra's stone machinery. Builders give the system form, but cleaners preserve it. Farmers spread its benefits into the soil. Carriers move it into homes. Officials divide it. Families conserve it. Merchants depend on it. Every group participates differently, and none can be separated entirely from the others. When visitors look across Petra today, the empty channels can create the illusion that the system belonged only to the past. In reality, those channels once connected thousands of daily decisions. The city's greatest achievement was not simply that water reached Petra. It was that generations of people organized their lives around keeping it there. The labor that keeps Petra's water flowing does more than preserve human life. It changes the appearance of the valley itself. Beyond the facades and public buildings, water enters soil, roots, and shaded courtyards, creating pockets of green where the surrounding mountains seem almost incapable of supporting them. These cultivated spaces are easy to underestimate because plants leave fewer traces than stone. A wall can survive for 2,000 years. A tree disappears within a generation if no one waters it, yet terraces, channels, pollen, seeds, irrigation basins, and garden architecture reveal that Petra was not merely a city of bare rock. At its height, parts of the basin may have contained orchards, fields, vines, pools, and deliberately designed landscapes that turn controlled water into food, comfort, and political display. Agriculture begins outside the densest urban centre, where slopes can be reshaped into narrow bands of soil. Petra's mountains shed water quickly and without intervention. Rainfall strips loose earth from the hillsides and carries it into ravines. Farmers slow this movement by constructing retaining walls across the contours of the land. Behind each wall, sediment accumulates, creating a level or gently sloping terrace. Rainwater spreads across the soil rather than rushing downhill, and more of it has time to sink toward plant roots. The walls are rarely monumental, though many are built from local stone without elaborate decoration, yet they perform several tasks at once. They reduce erosion, trap fertile silt, hold moisture, and make steep ground cultivable. During a storm, runoff from the slope above enters the terrace. If the wall is well designed, excess water passes through a controlled opening or over a strengthened edge into the terrace below. A series of small fields can therefore divide one destructive flow into several useful irrigations. This system demands judgment. A wall that holds too much water may collapse under pressure. One that releases water too quickly leaves the soil dry. Sediment can block outlets, causing overflow in the wrong place. Farmers must inspect terraces after storms, rebuild fallen sections, and redistribute soil where erosion has created uneven ground. The work continues year after year because each rainfall alters the landscape slightly. The crops grown around Petra likely varied according to soil, elevation, and access to water. Cereals such as barley and wheat could be cultivated where enough moisture accumulated, though yields would have fluctuated sharply between seasons. Legumes helped diversify the diet and may have improved soil fertility. Grapevines, olive trees, and fruit trees offered advantages in terraced landscapes because established roots could reach moisture stored below the surface. Trees also survived from year to year, reducing the need to replant after every uncertain season. Orchards would have required patience. A grain field can produce within months, but a young tree consumes water for years before yielding a dependable harvest. Planting one represents confidence that the terrace, channel, and social system supporting it will continue. A damaged wall or disputed water route can destroy an investment made by an earlier generation. The presence of long-lived crops therefore suggests not only agricultural skill, but a degree of stability in landholding and water access. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate how much food the Petra region produced for its own population. The city probably did not depend entirely on local fields. Trade allowed grain, oil, wine, dried fruit, and other goods to arrive from more productive areas. Yet importing everything would have been expensive and risky, especially during conflict or disrupted trade. Local cultivation gave Petra a buffer. It supplied fresh produce, supported animals, and reduced dependence on distant markets. Water used for agriculture did not always have to meet drinking standards. Runoff carrying fine sediment could be directed toward terraces, where the sediment itself might enrich the soil. Water already used for washing or other domestic purposes may have been reused when practical, though direct evidence for specific household practices is limited. In a culture shaped by scarcity, allowing usable moisture to drain away without purpose would have been difficult to justify. Within the city, cultivation takes a more controlled and sometimes more luxurious form. Archaeologists have identified evidence for a substantial garden complex near the urban centre, including a large pool, channels, architectural features, and spaces suitable for planted areas. The garden stood close to important public and ceremonial buildings, where it would have been seen by elites, officials, visitors, and merchants. This was not a hidden vegetable plot, it was a designed landscape. The pool at its centre required a dependable supply and careful maintenance. Open water loses moisture rapidly through evaporation, especially under strong sun and dry winds. Its walls had to be sealed, sediment had to be removed, channels had to deliver enough water to replace what disappeared. Keeping such a pool full was therefore an expensive choice. Its value lay partly in the fact that it was expensive. Around it, trees and other plants could create shade, cool the air, and soften the hard geometry of stone architecture. The contrast would have been striking. A traveller emerging from dry caravan routes enters a city where water reflects the sky, and leaves move in shaded courtyards. The experience communicates something beyond comfort. It suggests that Petra's rulers command enough resources to maintain beauty in a place where survival itself requires engineering. The garden may also have served ceremonial, social, or diplomatic purposes. Elite guests could be received in a setting that demonstrated wealth without requiring spoken explanation. Water, architecture, and vegetation work together as a political performance. The exact plants remain uncertain, and reconstructions depend on botanical evidence, regional comparisons, and the physical arrangement of the site. What survives in the record suggests a carefully managed environment rather than wild greenery. Smaller gardens probably existed beside houses, temples, and courtyards. A household with access to a cistern or branch channel could grow herbs, vines, vegetables, or a few fruit trees. Such spaces provided food, fragrance, shade, and privacy. They also required daily attention. Soil in enclosed courtyards dries quickly. Water must be carried or released in measured amounts. Plants must be protected from animals and intense sun. A garden becomes another form of stored wealth, one that can die visibly if the household's water supply fails. The relationship between useful cultivation and ornamental display was not always clear-cut. A grapevine provides fruit, shade, and beauty. An olive tree yields oil while also signalling permanence. A pool can decorate a residence, store water, cool surrounding air, and supply nearby plants. Nabatean landscapes often combine functions rather than separating them neatly. This is consistent with the wider water system, where dams protect roads while trapping sediment and channels supply reservoirs while reducing erosion. Yet these green spaces also reveal social inequality. During drought, the water sustaining an elite pool might appear excessive beside the needs of poorer households. Whether supplies were restricted during shortages is unknown, but no city dependent on limited reserves could ignore the political consequences of visible luxury. Water display strengthened authority only while people believed the underlying system remained secure. For much of Petra's flourishing period, that confidence appears to have endured. Terraces held soil along the slopes, orchards rooted human plans into the mountains. Courtyard plants softened houses built against stone. Near the centre, an ornamental pool turned the desert sky into a trembling reflection. The city's green spaces were never effortless, and perhaps that was precisely why they mattered. Each leaf represented water diverted, cleaned, stored, and deliberately released in Petra. A garden was not simply nature brought inside the city, it was proof that the city understood nature well enough to make scarcity bloom. By the early 2nd century AD, Petra stands at the centre of a kingdom whose wealth has been shaped by movement across deserts and by the careful control of water. Its rulers have carved authority into cliffs, extended channels through mountains, and built a capital capable of receiving traders from distant regions. Yet the political world around Petra is changing. Rome has expanded across the eastern Mediterranean, absorbed Egypt, dominated Syria, and drawn the commercial routes of the Near East into an imperial system larger than any Nabatean king can command. In AD 106, after the death of the Nabatean ruler Rabel II, the kingdom is annexed and reorganized as the Roman province of Arabia. Petra does not fall in a dramatic siege. No great destruction marks the transfer. A kingdom simply disappears from the political map, while its city continues to live under a new authority. Roman annexation does not erase Nabatean society overnight. Local families remain. Merchants continue trading. Nabatean religious customs, language, architecture, and practical knowledge survive for generations. The channels do not suddenly become Roman because a governor arrives. They continue to carry water along routes designed by earlier engineers and maintained by workers who understand the landscape better than distant administrators ever could. The transition is therefore less a replacement than a layering. Roman institutions settle over Nabatean foundations. Petra initially benefits from its new position. Roman rule can provide military security across a wider territory, standardized administration, and stronger connections with provincial markets. Roads are improved or formally organized, linking the former Nabatean kingdom with Syria, the Red Sea, and the Mediterranean. Petra receives the honorary title of a metropolis, reflecting its continued importance. Public building does not stop. Streets are monumentalized, temples altered, and civic spaces adapted to imperial styles. Water remains central to these changes. Roman urban culture places a strong emphasis on public baths, fountains, colonnaded streets, and monumental civic display. These features require dependable supplies. In regions with great rivers or abundant springs, Roman engineers can construct long aqueducts delivering enormous flows. Petra offers no such simple abundance. Any Roman-style expansion must operate within a hydraulic landscape already created for arid conditions. This is where Nabatean knowledge proves indispensable. The city's water system cannot be replaced by a standard design imported from elsewhere. Its channels follow the contours of Petra's specific mountains. Its dams respond to particular flood paths. Its cisterns depend on local sandstone and seasonal runoff. Roman administrators may extend, repair, or reorganize parts of the system, but they inherit a network whose intelligence lies in adaptation. Petra's continued urban life under Rome is possible because the conquerors preserve much of what the Nabateans built. Some conduits appear to have been enlarged or altered during the Roman period. Ceramic pipelines become more elaborate in certain areas, and distribution toward public buildings may have increased. Baths require large quantities of water not only for pools but for cleaning, heating systems, and repeated replacement. Fountains need continuous or carefully regulated flow if they are to perform their civic role. These demands place additional pressure on the network, especially during dry years. Roman influence also changes how water is displayed. Nabatean rulers had already used pools and gardens to communicate prosperity, but imperial urban design gives public water a broader ceremonial function. Fountains can mark important intersections, decorate sacred precincts, and associate the city with Roman ideas of civilization. A flowing basin suggests that the province is orderly, prosperous, and connected to imperial power. Yet beneath the columns and carved ornament, the water still arrives through channels cut according to the logic of the desert. The colonnaded street becomes one of the most visible symbols of Petra's transformation. It organizes movement through the urban center and creates a setting for shops, ceremonies, and public gathering. Water management must be integrated into this redesigned space. Drainage channels carry waste and storm runoff away from buildings. Supply lines serve fountains and nearby structures. Pavements and retaining walls alter the natural movement of rain, sometimes creating new problems that require new diversions. Urban growth always changes a watershed. A slope once capable of absorbing part of a storm becomes a roof or paved courtyard. Water runs from it faster. Streets channel flow toward lower ground. Walls block older drainage paths. Every new structure forces engineers to reconsider where runoff will go. Petra's Roman period builders are therefore not merely decorating an established city. They are constantly adjusting the balance between architecture and floodwater. Roman political control may also have altered the administration of water. Taxes, public works, and civic offices become part of a provincial system. Wealthy local families can gain status by sponsoring buildings, repairs, fountains, or public facilities. Municipal authorities may oversee major infrastructure, while households and landowners continue managing smaller cisterns. Scholars still debate how responsibilities were divided because the surviving evidence is fragmentary. What survives in the record suggests continuity mixed with selective reorganization rather than a complete imperial takeover of every channel. The annexation also affects Petra's trade. For a time, integration into the Roman Empire strengthens commercial connections. The city remains a center for regional exchange and caravan movement, but Rome also develops alternative routes. Maritime trade through the Red Sea grows increasingly important, and goods can reach Mediterranean ports without passing through every traditional inland station. New roads may benefit Petra while also making it easier for traffic to bypass it. This contradiction develops slowly. Roman rule brings investment and prestige, yet the same imperial network reduces Petra's unique position. The city once prospered partly because Nabatean guides and rulers controlled difficult passages between separate political worlds. Under one empire, those boundaries become less important. Trade continues, but Petra is no longer the indispensable gateway it had once been. Even so, the city remains active for centuries. Houses are occupied, churches will later be built, markets continue, and waterworks remain in use. Roman annexation is not the end of Petra. It is a turning point in which the city's identity broadens while its political independence disappears. Nabatean traditions survive beneath Roman architecture, just as Nabatean channels continue running beneath streets reshaped by imperial planners. There is a quiet irony in this transformation. Rome is often remembered as the ancient world's greatest builder of aqueducts. Yet at Petra, the empire inherits a water system designed by people whom Roman authors had once described as desert nomads. The conquerors bring new styles, institutions, and demands, but they cannot escape the older knowledge embedded in the mountains. Every bath, fountain, and civic monument still depends on rainfall caught by Nabatean walls. Springs guided through Nabatean routes, and cisterns carved according to Nabatean experience. For a while, the combination works. Petra remains wealthy enough to repair its channels and ambitious enough to display water publicly. But the city's growing complexity makes it more vulnerable. More buildings mean more maintenance. More ornamental use means greater demand. More dependence on imperial trade means exposure to changes decided far beyond the valley. The Water Kingdom has entered a larger world, and that world will eventually shift beneath it. The larger world does not abandon Petra in a single moment. There is no one night when the channels fall silent, the markets empty, and the last residents disappear into the desert. The city weakens through accumulation. Trade shifts. Earthquakes. Damaged structures that are expensive to repair. Political centers move elsewhere. Public buildings lose their original purposes. Water systems continue functioning in some districts while failing in others. Petra's decline is therefore not a clean collapse, but a long negotiation between a changing population and an increasingly difficult urban landscape. The first pressure comes from commerce. Petra's rise depended on its position within networks carrying valuable goods across Arabia and the Near East. For centuries, control over desert routes made the Nabateans essential intermediaries. Under Roman rule, however, trade becomes part of a wider imperial system. Maritime routes through the Red Sea expand. Ships can carry far greater loads than caravans and often move goods at lower cost. Ports connected to Egypt and the Mediterranean become increasingly important. Roads still pass through Petra, but the city no longer controls the same privileged position between distant markets. This change does not eliminate trade. Caravans continue moving through the region, and Petra remains connected to surrounding settlements. Yet the character and volume of commerce may gradually alter. Luxury goods that once produced enormous profits can bypass the city. Local and regional exchange becomes more important than the long-distance trade that financed monumental construction. A city built during centuries of extraordinary wealth now has fewer resources available for maintaining the infrastructure created in that wealthier age. Maintenance is especially difficult because Petra's waterworks are extensive. A small settlement can abandon one damaged channel and rely on another spring. A large city must preserve dams, aqueducts, cisterns, drains, retaining walls, public reservoirs, and distribution lines across a rugged landscape. Every structure ages. Plaster separates from sandstone, ceramic pipes crack, sediment reduces storage capacity, terraces collapse. Floods reopen channels that earlier builders had diverted. As long as revenue and labour remain abundant, these problems can be repaired. When both become scarce, the network begins to contract. Earthquakes accelerate this process. Petra lies within a tectonically active region influenced by the Dead Sea Transform fault system. Seismic events repeatedly affect the southern Levant, and ancient buildings preserve evidence of sudden structural damage. Columns fall in consistent directions. Masonry walls crack. Floors shift. Rock-cut monuments survive better than freestanding structures in some cases, but even the cliffs can fracture. Water infrastructure is particularly vulnerable because it depends on precise alignment and sealed surfaces. A major earthquake in AE 363 appears to have caused extensive destruction at Petra and across the region. Buildings collapsed, streets were blocked, and parts of the hydraulic network were likely damaged. The precise scale of destruction remains debated because later repairs, reuse, and erosion complicate the evidence. What survives in the record suggests that the city recovered, but not completely. Some structures were rebuilt, others were abandoned or adapted for simpler uses. The pattern reveals a community still capable of responding, though perhaps no longer able to restore everything to its earlier form. For a water system, earthquake damage can be subtle and devastating. A reservoir may remain standing while a new fracture allows its contents to leak away. A channel shifted by only a small amount may lose the gradient required for flow. A dam weakened at its foundation may survive ordinary runoff but fail during the next severe storm. Ceramic pipes can break at multiple joints beneath rubble, making the source of water loss difficult to locate. Repair crews must not only clear collapsed stone but rediscover how the system once functioned. The damage also creates new flood risks. Fallen masonry blocks drains. Rubble redirects runoff into houses or streets. Retaining walls that once stabilized slopes collapse, allowing sediment to move downhill. A broken diversion structure may return water to an older natural path that now passes through inhabited areas. Earthquake recovery is therefore a race against the next storm. The city must rebuild enough of its hydraulic defenses before heavy rainfall transforms structural damage into further destruction. Petra's inhabitants respond with adaptation rather than surrender. Large buildings are subdivided into smaller rooms. Monumental spaces are reused for workshops, storage, or housing. Fallen architectural blocks become convenient building material. Churches appear as Christianity spreads through the Roman and later Byzantine worlds. These changes do not prove sudden poverty. Cities naturally evolve. But they do suggest that Petra's priorities are shifting away from the grand public display of the Nabatean and early Roman periods. Water use changes with those priorities. Ornamental pools may become harder to justify. Fountains cease flowing when supply lines are damaged or redirected. Baths require more maintenance than smaller domestic facilities, and may decline as population and public funding shrink. Water that once supported spectacle is reserved for basic needs, cultivation, and neighbourhood survival. The network becomes less centralised and more selective. Political geography is changing as well. After administrative reforms within the Roman Empire, other cities gain regional importance. Provincial boundaries are reorganised, military routes shift, and centres closer to productive agricultural land or major roads attract investment. Petra retains religious and local significance, but is no longer the capital of an independent kingdom or the unquestioned commercial centre of the region. Decisions affecting its future are increasingly made elsewhere. Another destructive earthquake, often associated with the middle of the 6th century, may have caused further damage, although the chronology and impact remain uncertain. By then, communities still live in Petra, but many monumental areas have already changed function. Repeated seismic destruction does not make settlement impossible. It makes large-scale restoration less attractive when political and economic rewards have diminished. Climate may also have contributed to Petra's difficulties, though it should not be treated as a simple explanation. Rainfall naturally varies across decades and centuries, and periods of drought would have placed stress on storage, agriculture, and food supply. However, the city had always faced climatic uncertainty. Drought alone cannot explain its decline. No single explanation fully accounts for what happened. The weakening of trade, earthquake damage, shifting administration, population change, and the rising cost of maintaining complex infrastructure all interact. The decline of Petra is therefore best understood as a loss of capacity. The knowledge required to manage water does not vanish immediately. Residents continue clearing cisterns, repairing local channels, and cultivating terraces, but the city can no longer sustain every element of the enormous network inherited from its peak. Maintenance becomes concentrated where people still live. Outlying conduits are abandoned. Public reservoirs fill with sediment. Broken pipes remain broken. A distributed system that once provided resilience begins to fragment into isolated pockets. This fragmentation changes the city physically. Areas without dependable water lose residents first. Houses near functioning cisterns remain occupied longer. Agricultural activity may persist around reliable catchments, even as central monuments fall into disuse. Petra becomes not an empty ruin, but a smaller settlement living among the architecture of a larger past. The contrast must have been striking. Carved facades still tower above the valley, preserving the confidence of wealthy families and kings. Yet beneath them, channels dry out and streets narrow between reused stones. A reservoir built for crowds may serve only a handful of households. A garden once maintained as a symbol of power returns to dust. The monuments remain impressive because stone remembers ambition longer than a city can afford to sustain it. Petra does not fail because its engineers misunderstood the desert. Their system keeps communities alive for centuries through political conquest, earthquakes, commercial change, and religious transformation. The city declines because even excellent infrastructure depends on the society maintaining it. When wealth, labor, authority, and population all diminish, stone channels cannot repair themselves. Water continues to fall on the mountains, but less of it reaches the places built to receive it. When Petra's population contracts and large parts of the city fall out of use, the water system does not disappear. It becomes harder to see. Channels fill with dust. Cistern openings collapse. Dams are buried beneath sediment, and later walls are built across older conduits. Visitors notice the facades because they rise dramatically from the cliffs, while the hydraulic network remains scattered across slopes, ravines, and dark chambers for centuries. Petra's most important engineering achievement survives in fragments that seem unrelated until archaeologists begin tracing how they connect. The work is difficult because the city's water system was never one uniform construction. It expanded over generations. A channel may begin in the Nabatean period, receive a Roman pipe, be repaired in the Byzantine era, and later be reused by local communities. Plaster layers overlap. Walls are rebuilt at slightly different angles. Reservoirs change purpose. A basin designed to settle sediment may later serve as a storage tank, animal trough, or refuse pit. Archaeologists must separate these phases carefully, knowing that every repair both preserves and obscures what came before. The most visible clues remain along the Sick. The narrow gorge still carries the marks of channels cut into both walls, though many sections have been damaged or restored. Researchers study their gradients, widths, coatings, and connections to ceramic pipes. Even small differences matter. A conduit designed for clean spring water may be narrower and more protected than one intended to carry storm runoff. A sudden change in level can indicate rebuilding after a collapse. A blocked branch may reveal where water once entered a vanished structure. Near the entrance, the dam and diversion tunnel demonstrate how the Nabateans redirected floods away from the main passage. Modern study of the catchment shows that these works responded to water arriving from a much larger area than the canyon itself. The structure is not an isolated barrier. It belongs to a landscape-wide system of runoff control. By mapping slopes and drainage lines, archaeologists can reconstruct the path water followed before reaching the city. Some discoveries come from walking the terrain slowly. A shallow groove on a distant hillside may be the surviving edge of a channel. A line of stones crossing a gully can mark a collapsed check dam. A patch of unusually deep soil may have formed behind an ancient agricultural terrace. Plaster on the inside of a dark cavity can identify it as a cistern rather than a natural cave. Petra rewards attention to features that look insignificant alone but become meaningful when plotted together. Aerial photography and satellite imagery add another perspective. From above, terrace walls and drainage lines sometimes appear as patterns invisible at ground level. Drones can document inaccessible cliffs and produce detailed models of ravines, facades, and channels. Digital mapping allows researchers to connect a high mountain catchment with a reservoir far below and calculate whether gravity could have carried water between them. These methods do not replace excavation, but they reveal where excavation may be most useful. Hydraulic modelling has also become important. Researchers estimate how much water a channel could carry, how quickly a reservoir might fill, and whether a dam could survive a particular flood. Such calculations help test interpretations, but they depend on uncertain variables. Ancient rainfall patterns are not known precisely. Some channels have eroded beyond their original dimensions. Reservoirs may once have been deeper before filling with sediment. The city's population fluctuated seasonally as merchants and caravans arrived. Scholars still debate Petra's total water capacity because small changes in these assumptions produce very different results. Cistern interiors preserve especially valuable evidence. Layers of silt can record repeated filling events. Plaster repairs reveal long use. Tool marks show how chambers were enlarged. Sediment may contain pollen, seeds, charcoal, and fragments of organic material that help reconstruct the surrounding environment. A reservoir is therefore more than a container. It can become an archive of storms, maintenance, vegetation, and human activity. Yet excavation creates risks. Removing sediment from an ancient cistern may expose weakened walls. Opening a blocked conduit can alter modern drainage and send water into unstable ruins. Restoring one dam may redirect floods toward another vulnerable area. Archaeologists and conservation teams must understand not only the ancient system, but the living watershed that still surrounds Petra. This became painfully clear in modern times when flash floods continued to threaten visitors and monuments. The ancient danger has never vanished. Heavy rain falling beyond the visible valley can still rush toward the sick with little warning. Modern authorities have restored and modified flood control structures, sometimes following Nabatean routes because the ancient engineers had already identified the most effective places to intervene. Their solutions cannot simply be copied without adjustment, but they remain practical guides. The effort to protect Petra also reveals a tension between preservation and tourism. Large numbers of visitors pass through the sick and central valley, increasing pressure on paths, drainage, and fragile surfaces. Modern repairs must be strong enough to protect people while avoiding damage to ancient remains. New pipes, barriers, and walkways can solve immediate problems but obscure the archaeological evidence beneath them. Every intervention changes the site that future researchers will study. Water itself continues to erode the monuments. Rain seeps into sandstone, dissolves minerals, widens cracks, and carries salts toward carved surfaces. When the water evaporates, crystals form inside the stone and slowly force grains apart. Wind then removes the weakened material. The same process that allowed Petra's builders to carve elaborate facades also makes those facades vulnerable over time. Conservation is therefore another form of water management. Archaeological research has also challenged the popular image of Petra as a single ceremonial city occupied mainly by kings and priests. Surveys reveal residential neighborhoods, agricultural areas, workshops, roads, and storage facilities spread across a much broader region. The water network connects these parts. It shows that Petra was not merely a monumental center, but a working landscape supporting ordinary households and seasonal populations. Some questions remain unresolved. Researchers do not know exactly how water rights were assigned, how supplies were rationed during severe drought, or which authority maintained each structure. They cannot always determine whether a reservoir served drinking water, irrigation, industry, ritual, or several uses over time. The evidence remains incomplete because water systems are repeatedly altered, and practical structures rarely carry inscriptions explaining their purpose. Even uncertainty, however, reveals something important. Petra's network was flexible enough to change. Channels could be redirected, cisterns enlarged, and older works incorporated into new urban plans. The system's complexity is not the result of one perfect master design. It is the accumulated record of problems solved by many generations. Each survey adds another line to that record. A buried pipe connects a spring to a public building. A forgotten dam explains why a valley floor contains deep sediment. A repaired plaster layer shows that a cistern remained useful after an earthquake. A terrace wall reveals that land once dismissed as barren supported cultivation. The ruins still do not yield a complete map. Parts of the network remain buried, destroyed, or beyond safe reach. Yet every discovery shifts attention away from the famous facades and toward the infrastructure that made them possible. Petra's stone monuments preserve how the city wished to be remembered. Its channels, reservoirs, and dams preserve how it actually survived. Petra's surviving channels offer no simple formula for the modern world. They were created for a particular landscape, climate, economy, and society, and many depended on forms of labour and authority that cannot be transferred neatly into the present. Yet the principles embedded in them remain strikingly relevant. The Nabateans understood that water security begins long before water reaches a household. It begins on distant slopes, in the shape of a catchment, in the condition of soil, in the speed of runoff, and in decisions about what should be stored, diverted, filtered, or allowed to pass. Their city survived because they treated the entire landscape as infrastructure. Modern cities often separate water from the environments that produce it. Rain falls on roofs and paved streets, enters drains, and is carried away as quickly as possible. Drinking water arrives through pipes from reservoirs or rivers far beyond the places where it is consumed. Wastewater disappears underground. This separation creates convenience, but it can also hide vulnerability. People may not know where their water comes from, how much remains, or what happens when a distant source fails. Petra made water visible even when much of it was stored underground. The roots of channels shaped streets and buildings. Cistern openings reminded households that supply was finite. Storms demanded immediate attention. Agriculture depended on the condition of terrace walls. Water management was not an isolated technical service. It was woven into the physical and social life of the city. One of the clearest lessons is the value of distributed storage. Petra did not rely on a single enormous reservoir. It used many cisterns, tanks, springs, dams, and catchments spread across different elevations. This reduced the danger that one failure would destroy the entire supply. A damaged pipe might isolate one district, but neighbourhood storage could continue. Rain falling over one ridge might fill reservoirs even if another catchment remained dry. Redundancy allowed the city to absorb uncertainty. Modern systems also depend on redundancy, though efficiency can sometimes encourage the opposite. Centralized infrastructure is cheaper to operate when conditions remain stable, but when a major pipeline breaks, a reservoir is contaminated, or an extreme storm exceeds design limits, entire populations can lose service at once. Petra suggests that smaller local reserves, rainwater capture, restored wetlands, permeable surfaces, and neighbourhood-scale systems can strengthen larger networks rather than replace them. The Nabateans also understood that flood control and water supply are not separate problems. The same storm that threatens destruction contains a resource that may be needed months later. Their dams and diversion work slowed dangerous flows while directing part of the water towards storage or soil. Modern cities often treat floods only as something to remove. Concrete channels move water downstream rapidly, sometimes transferring risk from one community to another. Petra's approach encourages a different question. Where can water be slowed safely, allowed to settle, absorbed into the ground, or stored for later use? This does not mean ancient methods should be romanticized. Petra's system could not prevent every flood. Cistern water could become contaminated. Drought still threatened the population. Access was probably unequal. Maintaining hundreds of structures demanded difficult labour, and the authority controlling water may not always have distributed it fairly. Ancient sustainability was not automatically humane, democratic, or effortless. The city also depended on trade. Local terraces and gardens contributed food, but Petra's population and economy were tied to wider commercial networks. A failure of those networks could not be solved by hydraulic skill alone. Engineering gave the city resilience, not independence from history. This distinction matters because modern discussions sometimes present technology as if it can remove political and economic vulnerability. Petra demonstrates the opposite. Infrastructure remains effective only while institutions, labour, knowledge, and resources exist to maintain it. Its decline makes that lesson especially clear. The channels did not stop working because their principles became incorrect. They failed gradually as earthquakes damaged them, trade weakened, political priorities changed, and the population lost the capacity to repair the entire network. Good design can extend the life of a city, but no design maintains itself. Every reservoir eventually fills with sediment. Every dam develops weak points. every pipe leaks. Sustainability is not a structure completed once. It is an agreement renewed through maintenance. That agreement depends on memory. The Nabateans remembered where floods travelled, which springs weakened during drought, and which slopes delivered cleaner runoff. Modern societies collect far more data, yet they can still lose practical memory when experienced workers retire, records are neglected, or planning cycles focus only on immediate costs. Petra's water system suggests that resilience depends not merely on information, but on keeping knowledge active across generations. There is also a lesson in restraint. Petra's greatest achievement was not maximizing water consumption. It was reducing loss. Channels were covered to limit evaporation. Cistern openings were kept narrow. Runoff was slowed before it escaped. Supplies of different quality were used for different purposes. The system sought to match water to need. Drinking water did not have to irrigate every field, and muddy storm runoff did not have to be discarded simply because it was unsuitable for drinking. In many modern cities, highly treated water is used for gardens, street cleaning, industrial processes, and sanitation because a single network serves every purpose. Reuse systems and separate supplies can reduce this waste, but they require planning and public trust. Petra shows that distinguishing between types of water is not a recent invention. Scarcity encourages societies to recognize that water has different values depending on its quality and intended use. The city's story has become more urgent as climate change increases the intensity of droughts and extreme rainfall in many regions. Some places face longer periods without rain, interrupted by storms too violent for existing drainage systems. These conditions resemble, in broad form, the contradiction Petra managed for centuries: too little water most of the time, and too much of it all at once. The Nabateans could not control the climate, but they designed for variability rather than assuming that every year would resemble the last. No single ancient city can provide a complete answer to modern water stress. Today's populations are larger, industries more demanding, and pollution more complex. Desalination, advanced treatment, deep groundwater pumping, and massive reservoirs operate at scales the Nabateans could not have imagined. Yet technological scale can create the illusion that local landscapes no longer matter. Petra warns against that illusion. Its engineers began with the shape of the ground. They followed the path of gravity. They observed where sediment settled and where walls failed. They stored water close to where it would be used. They built multiple layers of protection rather than trusting one barrier. Most importantly, they accepted uncertainty as a permanent condition. Petra was never a city that possessed enough water. It was a city that learned how to live with water that arrived unpredictably. Its brilliance lies not in abundance but in attention. Every channel expresses an understanding that resources become secure only when people notice where they are lost. Every cistern reflects the decision to save part of the present for an unknown future. Every terrace shows that survival can depend on slowing what appears too quickly and preserving what would otherwise disappear. And now the city stands quieter than it once did. The markets no longer fill with caravan traders, and water no longer moves through every branch of the ancient network. The pools that reflected columns have dried. Soil lies behind broken terrace walls, and wind passes through openings where jars were once lowered into darkness. Yet when rain falls over Petra, the mountains remember their old paths. Water gathers along ridges, enters ravines, and seeks the lowest ground just as it did when Nabatean workers watched the sky. Some of it still passes beside channels carved by hands long vanished. Some reaches cisterns whose plaster bears the marks of repeated repair. Some rushes toward the sea, where ancient and modern barriers continue the effort to protect those walking below. The stone city has survived in fragments, but its deepest story was never written only in stone. It was written in movement, water falling, workers climbing, mud settling, roots deepening, reservoirs emptying, and clouds returning after months of silence. Generations lived between those moments, never certain what the next season would bring, yet building as though careful preparation could hold uncertainty at bay. Perhaps that is why Petra continues to feel alive even in ruin. Its monuments speak of wealth and ambition, but its channels speak of patience. They remind us that civilizations are sustained by quiet systems, rarely celebrated while they function. A city may be remembered for temples, palaces, and tombs, yet its true foundations often lie in covered pipes, repaired walls, cleared drains, and the people who return to them year after year. Even the most carefully designed city remains temporary. Stone erodes, routes change, reservoirs fill with dust, names disappear. But for centuries, in a valley surrounded by dry mountains, human beings caught rain before it escaped and stored storms beneath their feet. They made gardens where cliffs seemed to promise only heat and silence. They turned a dangerous canyon into an entrance, a flood into a reserve, and scarcity into enough. As evening settles over Petra, the sandstone slowly loses its fire. The carved facades darken, the ravines cool, and shadows gather inside empty cisterns. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a cloud may be forming over ground that appears completely dry. The city waits as it has always waited, not for endless abundance, but for a few hours of rain, and for the chance to save what time allows before the desert takes it back.